Today we have a special guest. Today we have John Viscardo from the podcast Generals and Napoleon. We're going to be talking about the new movie Napoleon by Ridley Scott, stars Joaquin Phoenix. Spoiler alert, I loved it. And yeah, we're just going to get into it. It's going to be fun. It's a lot of fun. I listened to like 2 or 3 episodes of Generals and Napoleon before recording. After talking with John and after starting to listen, I have binged a ton of this content. Please check his podcast out. It's very good. And I love his angle. His angle is not just Napoleon, but it's Napoleon's generals. Like, how does it work? We'll talk about like one of the generals that I've been fascinated with since starting to listen to his stuff, Berthier, and how somebody like Napoleon will just give an impossible command, and then this general has to like make it actually real and what that looks like. And I love that. Awesome stuff. Also, and this is the most important part, John is lovely, and I just thoroughly enjoyed talking with him. So thanks, John. And let's talk about a movie.
Okay. The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph.
A fiercest serpent may be overcome by a swarm of ants.
Lead me, follow me, or get out of my way. Age wrinkles the body, wrinkles the soul.
Battle buddies.
Battle buddies.
When AI first came out, I've been like terrified of it, right? Like all the doomsday stuff. AI, it's coming out, it's coming for me. But today I was looking at my Amazon app, and like a week ago, I had bought a fucking toothbrush, and Amazon thinks that what I need is 800 more toothbrushes. Like, that's all I'm getting from, that's the best that AI and algorithm can do.
Yeah, you would think maybe like mouthwash.
Yeah, toothpaste. Like
Toothpaste.
I can manually do this thing, and yet like the AI like machine, like that's the best they can come up with is more toothbrushes. It's lame.
Yeah, AI is not quite there yet.
If they conquer the world with that, like I'm gonna be really bummed.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
I think we got a while before Terminator starts showing up.
Best Terminator, Terminator 2.
Terminator 2 by far.
Oh, you're
One?
saying one. Interesting.
I'm an 80s kid, so like when I saw that like blew my mind. I
That's
was
true.
like, oh my God. Yeah.
When I
But
watched
two's very good.
2, when he like he reloads the shotgun, he cocks it with one hand on the motorcycle, like that was a defining moment for me as a
That's
kid.
the moment?
That was a moment my brother and I like, you that?
Yeah, well, so movies. We're going to be talking about movies today, and I'm pretty excited about this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special episode of Battle Buddies where we get to have Mr. John from
Yep.
Generals and Napoleon.
Yes.
You want to introduce yourselves?
Sure.
What are you about?
Sure. I'm John Viscardo. I have a little podcast called Generals and Napoleon. Very simply, it's about not Napoleon himself, but all the generals and enemy generals and kings and queens that were in the Napoleonic epic. And it's been going on 2 years now, and it's doing pretty good. I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
Absolutely. And it is really good.
It is
and
really
The
good.
link to his show will be in the bio of this episode. So if you're wondering where to find it, just scroll down and you'll see it.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
I highly recommend at least listening to the first episode right after this, before you see the movie, because I listened to it after I saw the movie, and I was like, I had a lot of these questions, and you had a lot of the answers because you do a Q&A for it, and I was like, that would have been helpful because I have these questions are going to come up. I wrote it down.
Yeah. But like you guys, I was a teacher at one point, and I taught world history, and when I got to the Napoleon and French Revolution, I would put up just a silhouette of Napoleon, and even kids who had no idea about any kind of history, they would know, all right, well, that's Napoleon. And I would say, okay, great. What did he do? And they would be like, some French guy, and as a teacher, you're like, okay, great. Well, there's more to him than that. So let's dive in.
What drew you to Napoleon, like as your content?
That's a good question. I bought a book once called The Campaigns of Napoleon. It's by this guy, David Chandler. It's a famous book. You can't even find it most places. And I bought it at a library bookstore, used for like $5. And I was sitting on a beach, and it's like a huge book. And I was reading it. And like 5 hours later, I was still sitting on that beach reading that same book. And I was like, oh my God. Because as teachers, you think like the general story of Napoleon, which I think that movie is just like the kind of the crib notes or the cheater's edition of Napoleon's life, but that book was all the details of all of his campaigns and all of his generals and all the kings and queens and the whole story, and it just blew my mind. So that kind of drew me to get more interested in Napoleon.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for listeners, for those of you who don't know, if you are one of those people that just don't look at phones or TVs for months at a time, a Ridley Scott movie by the name of Napoleon just dropped with Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon. We watched it.
Yeah.
You watched it as well, and it was actually Mr. Awesome John's idea on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it these days. He was just like, we should talk about this, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Dude, that's an awesome idea."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we watched
Let's
it.
dive in.
Let's-
What did you guys thumbnail sketch? What did you think?
Man, I mean, so I watched your video on YouTube of like your kind of like initial reaction of it, and I feel like if I knew people were coming up to me and they're like, how accurate is
Yeah,
it? And I
that's
was
the
like,
first
you're
question I
asking the
could
wrong guy.
get.
I don't know how accurate it is because I haven't gotten there yet. But I mean, the quick answer is I very much enjoyed it.
Okay.
I thought it was great. Again, I'm also, I mean, just from a person who doesn't know much about Napoleon, and we're gonna get into that obviously.
Sure.
Lots of
I
questions
thought
for
that the battle heavy portions of the movie were really thrilling to watch.
like watching
Okay.
people do flags. Like they're doing flag shit. Like that's cool.
Yeah.
Like, they're like
Morse code,
doing
stuff
flag,
like that.
that's dope.
Yeah, we really enjoyed. I wasn't expecting there to be that much like tactics in the battle scenes, and it was just considering we have a podcast about battles, it was like exciting to watch. There were parts where he and I looked at you like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
they're wheeling."
Yeah. And then I think too, like as a narrative, because again, we don't know too much about the history, because like I'm gonna have you try to explain some of the French Revolution to me, because that's where I usually stop in my history. As I get to the French Revolution, I'm like, it seems a little complicated, and then I stop.
You're like, we're out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the movie I appreciated it because, like one of my issues with biographies and autobiographies is it feels like a linear story, like a real story. It's like Dune. It's like you're climbing up to the climax and then you reach the climax and everything in this guy's life led to this moment. And this one was like, this guy's life was fucked up. Like there were some cool moments and there were some bad moments and it's all over the place. And he's really bad at having sex, I guess. And like, it's just like a lot of like pacing things. And I think people could critique it, but like, it kind of reminded me of like something I would imagine Kurt Vonnegut would make. Like it goes up and down a bunch of times. And I did appreciate that. Like it felt more authentic than like Gladiator, right? Because Gladiator is just like it goes up, and then just goes down at the end.
Yeah. On a scale of 0 to Terminator 2, what would you give it?
I'll put it to you this way. I'll watch it again.
All right.
Which is what he said he would not do to the
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer.
I don't need to watch Oppenheimer again, but
I didn't see that one. I hear it's quite long though. Yeah.
it's good, but I see more replay value from Napoleon. So I mean, my answer might change after you sit here and you discredit some of the accuracy of it, but
Okay.
I would say a solid like 7.5.
On my first, because I'm eager to rewatch it.
Yeah.
Like I'm excited
Okay.
to watch it with someone, like with my wife, and be like, "What do you think about it?"
Now tell us why we're wrong.
I'm not going to say you're wrong because if it and as teachers, like if it speaks to you and you make a difference in one person's life and they want to get into Napoleon, great, it's a success. I gave it a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
Just because there was a lot of historical inaccuracies, and I don't want to be like a uniform Nazi where the chevrons are wrong in that guy's uniform.
Yep.
I don't want to be that guy. But some of the linear stuff that happened was incorrect. But yeah, overall, I thought the costumes looked great. I thought the cinematography was beautiful. Ridley Scott, and just sidebar, Alien, Black Hawk Down, Gladiator, The Martian. I mean, Blade Runner, just huge career. Yep. So for me to sit here and critique that guy is kind of silly. But yeah, I would give it a 6 out of 10. I don't know. I just wanted it to be more. And I think that was kind of the problem, is that I wanted it to have a soul where I could really think that Joaquin nailed Napoleon's character. And it's hard to do. A guy who lived 51 years and was in power 15 of those years in 2.5 hours. It's hard to make that movie. So I give him a lot of credit that he kind of got through his whole career in that time span. But we'll get into why I didn't overall love it. But we'll get to that.
What about, like, before we go into the historical stuff, just like emotions? Like, did it capture the emotions that you feel when you are thinking about that time
That's
period?
a cool question.
That is a good question. No, it didn't.
Okay. So that matters to me, because that's what, like, we loved the feeling. We're like, man, it sounds like it was cool when they were doing the Austrian-Russian battle in the beginning. Like
Yeah.
they had to figure it out. But then I was listening to you like talk about it later. I'm like, oh, those seem at odds. Like, I don't know if like I'm misreading the energy or something.
Yeah.
No, I thought the battles were cool, and like you said, the gladiator battles were cool too.
Yeah.
And if I didn't know anything about it, I would say, all right, well, this is pretty interesting, but there's so much more. And I read two critiques of it earlier today because I want to get ready for your show. One said it was kind of like being on a tour bus of Napoleon's life, and you were like rushing through it, but you couldn't get off at the interesting parts because you had to hurry up and get to the next thing. So
I did
it was, yeah, and I thought that was pretty accurate. And then the other one said that maybe Napoleon's life was so epic that it can't really be captured by Hollywood. It was so, the guy came from nothing. He did. He came from Corsica in the middle of nowhere. He became not king, but emperor of France twice without firing a shot.
Yeah.
He defeated all of Europe, and just his life is so epic in scale. Like maybe it cannot be put into a movie. So there's that.
That kind of goes with Dan Carlin from Hardcore History, because he says in early episodes that he loved reading fiction until he read a book on Alexander the Great, and he's like, fiction kind of sucks compared to like this is like so much more epic. And then he was also critiquing the movie because he's like, the movie didn't capture, like, it's too epic, like it's nonfiction that's better than fiction.
Right.
John, was it you that I heard say that it would have been cool if it was like 3 movies as opposed to 1? I think that's a cool idea.
I would have
If
loved
there was like a trilogy of Napoleon movies, I think that's pretty smart.
And I think Spielberg is working on some miniseries about Napoleon that's coming out
as well. Yeah, that'll be good. That'll be real. Then we'll come right back and do the same thing.
Yeah.
And you can tell us all the things that are wrong about it.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you guys liked it though. If it spoke to you and you would see it again, then it's a good movie.
Yeah.
So I have a couple, if we're okay going in some
spoiler alert.
Napoleon dies.
No, I'm saying like for anybody listening,
all right.
Movie spoiled, we will be talking about the entire movie. So
right. A spoiler alert. Napoleon loses at Waterloo.
Spoiler alert.
Okay, so before we go into the movie, I had a couple general Napoleon questions for you from fair warning that I'm going to ask the legitimate question of if John thinks Napoleon has autism, but I'm going to try to do it as a joke because that's how Spencer and I do it, and I don't know if it lands or not. So if it doesn't, I'm sorry. Based on like the first couple episodes of your show, if I'm understanding like your outlook of Napoleon, that you're kind of saying he essentially has like a touch of the tism. Like he has like, so I have inattentive ADHD. I'm sorry if touch of the tism is incorrect. But like I have inattentive ADHD, right? So like I can hyper focus on some things, and when Spencer tells me to do something really easy, it's just like it's really hard for me to do it, and I feel bad for everybody involved. And the way that you kind of were framing him is like the battlefield was engaging and it made sense to him, and everything else kind of didn't. And is that a fair reading of him, or is that too simplistic?
No, I think that's a fair reading, and the movie kind of captures that a little bit. Like if you noticed, he was very calm on the battlefield in the movie, but when he was alone with Josephine or in social situations, he didn't know quite how to act or what to say, and he was awkward. Like the part where he's trying to take over the government and they kind of throw him out the front door.
That was awesome.
Yeah, and then that was accurate. That did happen. So sometimes he would get flustered when he was publicly speaking. So yeah, I would say he was. I don't know if it's confirmed that he was on the spectrum, but he was definitely somewhat introverted around like aristocrats or people who look down on him. He didn't quite know how to act. And even with Josephine, as we saw in the movie, he didn't know how to like be confident around her like he was on the battlefield.
Interesting. Like your view is that Napoleon is the hardest working guy in every room. Like when you're talking about, is Napoleon a genius? Like who knows? Same with like the spectrum thing. Like that's a stupid debate because we can't know, right? We can't using modern technology, like ways to look at him, and he was in the past, so it doesn't work. But you were saying hardest working guy in the room. Did the movie capture that feeling for you?
It didn't, and I wish it did. I feel like growing up, he when he especially when he got to France, he didn't speak French, so he had to work not only to do his regular studies, he had to learn the language. And then his father died, so he had to. He was like out of like 70 students, he was 60th in his graduating class,
Mm.
but he had to do it. Basically, he had to do 2 years of study in 1 year in military school because he had to hurry up, get out of college or not college, get out of military school so he could start earning money for his family as a lieutenant. So I think he was always the hardest working person in any room. And his generals and his aides, he would call them at 4 in the morning or 1 in the morning. He'd have a messenger go off and get them because he had an idea and he wanted to get it down on a map. And then the next thing you know, he was talking about rules at a new French boarding school that they were opening up, or the new taxation system of France's central bank that he was starting. So he was really, I wish they would have shown him giving out orders and handling different things at once, because that was really his, I don't know, sweet spot, if you would call it that he was really good at multitasking, probably better than any human in history.
Interesting.
Yeah, you kind of. Who was the general you talked about earlier? Berthier?
Berthier, yeah, that was his right hand man, his chief of staff. So Napoleon had again, in the movie they show a little bit of strategy. Like at Toulon, they attack at night. At Austerlitz, they kind of they have that part with the ice. I mean, there's more to it than that, where they're shooting camp.
Crazy.
Did you love that?
Dude,
I've never seen anything like that.
Okay.
With the horses in the water.
Yep. No, and that was true, and that did happen. But there was more to that strategy of that battle. But Berthier would take these very complicated ideas that Napoleon had and kind of simplify them to some of the generals, being like, you need to take this hill at this time. I don't care how you do it, but do it. Another general, you need to run a flanking maneuver with your cavalry. Artillery needs to be at this point at this time. And it was like a symphony. And then Berthier, as chief of staff, kind of had to figure out a way to tell the generals of what Napoleon had in mind.
Yeah, for an example on that, listeners, it was in your episode 2, and because I was like wanting a good example of that, and you were talking about just the marching of his 200,000 soldiers, and Napoleon, all he basically said, right, was like, I want 7 corps, and
Yep.
I want 200,000 men split into 7 groups, but I
Yep.
want I don't want infantry in one group and then cavalry in another. I want them all mixed up, and that's an impossible, complex order just to give. And Berthier is like, okay, like I'll make that happen, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he did, and same thing with the invasion of Russia. Napoleon's like, hey, we need 500,000 troops to invade Russia. Pull them from wherever you want in the empire and Europe, but make it happen. And Berthier was kind of like, okay, let's see how that goes.
Yeah, so you talked about like a movable bakery. Was that part of that?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? I'm always interested in the bread baking.
Yeah.
Military battle. It's like a
They had an army marches on its stomach, Napoleon's favorite saying. So they had to have bakeries behind, and food, and cattle, herds of cattle following the army. And then living off the land was a big thing Napoleon really pushed. Was like, I don't care how you get it, just get food. If you have to pillage a village, do it, and just keep the army marching, because his big thing was speed. Just get there the firstest with the mostest.
It is interesting, artistically speaking, when it comes to food and how movies will portray a person of power eating food. They always, you know what I'm saying? They always the power
the
eating.
Brad Pitt thing.
And the
Tom
he's
Cruise.
like eating in every movie,
Yeah.
and obviously the famous scene in the third Lord of the Rings when the king is like,
when Denethor is eating,
gorging himself.
Yeah.
But there's that interesting part towards the end when Napoleon is in the back of that ship and he's talking to all the midshipmen, and he's making that food just look ridiculously good, and he's has so much power and is so privileged that English guy, the English captain or whatever, comes in. He's like, "Why are all the midshipmen in there?" And they're like,
Oh yeah.
It's like, "Well, get him the hell out, bro. This dude's about to get exiled." And Napoleon's just like, so good. And it's just interesting how something as simple as how a king or an emperor eats a meal can just make them seem more powerful with like how they're eating a meal.
But earlier in the movie, he's eating with his hands. So I don't know if they're trying to show like him being not like a commoner, like eating with his
Like
I
hands.
childish
felt like the
almost.
uncouth part of him, like,
Is that right?
yeah, he's just like the everyman, like, that's why he can I felt and I didn't know if that was true or not, but, like, I felt like Ridley Scott was definitely selling that, like, he connects with them because he is one of them.
Mm.
Right, right. And Josephine, they don't really show in the movie, but she kind of taught him like social graces and like, you
Okay.
know, eat with your forks and your knives and work your way in, and how to deal with aristocrats and show proper court courtesy and things he didn't know as a commoner. So I wish they would have shown more of that in the film.
That would've been cool.
Was the portrayal of so I don't know anything about Josephine, but they definitely made Josephine seem as though she was not really into Napoleon so much.
For
Is
at least the
that
first 10 years.
right?
Right. And
She
she
always
wasn't.
she
She
was not.
wasn't. No, not at first. But like it showed in the movie, like she had just got out of jail. Like she almost lost her head, and I think she was just looking for. She's a survivor, Josephine, at her core, and she was just looking for a guy who had money who could keep her safe. And Napoleon was that. Now,
Stability.
right, but that didn't keep her from her dalliances, like it showed in the movie. Like he's off in Egypt, and she's hooking up with dudes, and so I think initially, no, she wasn't that into him, but I think over time, and especially when she knew she couldn't produce a baby, she's like, I got to hang on to this guy.
Yeah.
And
So
when
so
he's
is
like,
that
hey, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, when I was listening to you, you were talking about him leaving Egypt. So for the listeners, in the movie, he's in Egypt and he gets a report that his wife is having an affair, so then he goes back. And then I was listening to you and I was like doing a little bit of reading, and it seemed more like the narrative that I was getting from that was that he was worried about France like switching power or losing power after the French Revolution. So like he wanted to come like fix that.
Yeah, yeah, there was some of that. I wish they would have shown this in the movie too. Like he really made his name in Italy. Like, he had a lot of success there initially. That's where he started his really military career, other than blowing away the mob in Paris, which they did show in the movie.
That was
That was intense. He kind of made his name in Italy, conquering Italy for France. And then when he went to Egypt, Europe and Russia kind of took back Italy for the Austrians. So yeah, France was like, they were going bankrupt. There was a lot going on while he was in Egypt. So there was multiple reasons for him to come back from Egypt, in addition to Josephine cheating on him.
interesting.
Yeah, we were in the movie when remind me again who comes up and tells him that Josephine is
Yeah.
what's that dude's name?
His name, General Juno, who was one of his best buds. He was in the Toulon scene as
Okay.
well.
Yeah, so General
Yes.
Toulon comes
Juno.
Juno.
Yeah.
My
No
apologies.
worries.
But so he comes in and he says like, "Oh yeah, she's been cheating," and then Napoleon decides to bounce and leave.
Yep.
And me and Kevin literally looked at each other like, "That's crazy."
Yeah, that's a
if that's
crazy thing.
true.
Like I could not imagine Caesar doing that
Yeah.
in any of his campaigns. Be like, I think Cleopatra's cheating on me. Like, no way, man.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Napoleon seems so dedicated to the like to leading
Yeah,
in
to
that.
winning.
Yeah, and he was having some troubles in Egypt after a few successes against the Turks and the Egyptians. Some of his troops got bubonic plague, and several thousand of them died. He had a setback at one of the sieges in Palestine, so he wasn't doing all that great. And then all of his navy that he got there with got blown up by the British at the Battle of the Nile. So he was having troubles in Egypt already, and then all the stuff in France kind of came through, and I think that more than anything was what drew him to go back to Paris. He knew there was a power vacuum, and he was an ambitious guy, and he knew that this was his time to strike.
Dude, when he's in Egypt and he fires the cannons on to the pyramids, though, that was
Wild.
That was
Yeah.
wild to look at.
Didn't happen.
Okay,
I was gonna
yeah.
say there would be evidence. No,
I was like, I have to like this changes everything.
that does change everything. Yeah, I would say that a lot of the historians on the internet have seemed to say that Egypt was very yada 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 for this movie. There
It was.
yeah.
Yeah.
I will say one of my favorite scenes from the entire film is in Egypt when he goes and looks at the mummy.
Oh my God, I had that written down. I wanted to talk about that.
Dude,
Yeah.
what did you
Yeah,
think
tell
about
us about
that?
it.
I love that because I
Ew.
think he realized two things. Life is brief,
Yep.
and glory is fleeting, because he's looking at this mummy, who maybe it was a pharaoh
Right.
Yep.
who is now dead, and he was like staring at him, like basically looking in the mirror. That
Yes.
it goes fast.
Yeah, it's like an
Yeah.
Osmandius
So,
moment.
listeners,
Cool.
there's this scene. It's a very, very quiet scene where Napoleon gets to go look at this. They take off this tomb and they get to look at this mummy. And interesting, right? So Napoleon takes a box. He has to stand on a box to look at it eye to eye, right? And then he takes off his hat. He puts it on top of the mummy's like sarcophagus thing. And as he's sitting there, he puts his ear up to the mouth to listen. He
Yeah.
he's like listening for, I don't know, some
Dead men tell
guidance.
no tales.
Dead men tell no tales. And then he goes to try and touch it, and it moves on
Yeah.
its own, and everyone kind of just looks at each other, and it's like this symbolism of like, you're not gonna be a pharaoh. Like
Right.
you're not on that level. And
Yeah.
it was really interesting. I thought that, like, artistically speaking, that was fun to watch.
Yeah, I didn't catch that part where it moved. So yeah, maybe you're onto something there.
When it moves,
Yeah.
it was great.
Yeah, that was a really cool just a little touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely like an Osmandius, like, look at this great king that nobody even knows his name.
Yeah.
You know, like this crazy.
Yeah, good point. And there's another part of symbolism which I really enjoyed. Not to jump ahead, but when Moscow is burning and he kind of wakes up and goes out, and you see just him from the behind,
Mhm.
and it looks like his empire is like crash. It's like foreshadowing.
Mhm.
Like your empire is almost over too.
Mhm.
When he's sitting on that throne in Moscow and the birds are just shitting, and they have the sound design so loud for the birds pooping,
Yeah.
like that was hilarious.
That is really
Yeah, yeah, that was odd. That was odd. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, go ahead.
So I didn't know, and I wanted to clear it up with you about like his brother, right? It was his brother in the very beginning. I felt like his brother was like super pushing him to be like, to make some power moves and to try to get that early, like, I don't know, positional authority. Is that true? Like, was it his
Yeah.
brother? Okay, because from like my remembering of high school, like I do not remember any of that being taught. I remember it being like Napoleon is the driven man, like
Yeah.
he is the self-made man. And then I watched the movie, and it's the first 10 minutes, and the brother's like, "You gotta do this if you want it. Like, I want you to do it, so you should do it for me." And he's like, "Okay."
Yeah, I that was probably overhyped a little bit. I mean,
Okay.
Napoleon was naturally ambitious on his own. Now, his brothers did help him. Lucien, Joseph, Jerome, Louis. They helped him throughout. But yeah, I thought that was kind of cool, where he puts the sword on Napoleon's chest and says, if he ever attempts to become a dictator, I'll run my sword through him.
That was fantastic. And that little look he gave him, that was a great look. Like,
Yeah, the look was. I love that. I mean, he's like, let's see what they think about this, and the guards went in and took over the council. So
That was a really good
I
scene.
feel like that's me when I'm like parenting my kids and I'm just making shit up and like look at my wife. See if
yeah, isn't that funny? Like growing up, you just assume your parents know what they're doing, but we have no idea. We have no idea. Yeah.
make it all up.
Yep.
All right. So the fucking frozen lake thing. Like that was
Yeah.
I need to know, you're saying that's not even all of it. So like quick rundown, like what did they even not get like all the way?
So what is that battle called? Is that
Battle of Austerlitz. Austerlitz. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
Austerlitz in Austria, or was that in Russia?
It was Czech Republic, but it was like Austrian Empire area.
Okay.
Got it.
So yeah, it was basically a lot of, I don't know, I would say 80,000 Russians and Austrians against 60,000 soldiers of Napoleon's.
Okay.
And what they kind of talked about, which they would have gotten into, is Napoleon actually left the high ground. He had it was called the Pratzen Heights, and he actually took his army off of there. And the Austrians and Russians are like, oh, he's retreating. He's afraid of us. He's nothing to worry about. And you even see that in the movie, like the King of Austria and the Emperor Alexander are kind of talking about it.
Mhm.
And they're like, oh yeah, we'll handle this guy. No problem. And so what Napoleon did was feigning or pretending weakness, so they would attack him. And then when they did, they took their army off the heights to attack him and on this lowland. And when they did, Napoleon sent up his army onto the heights. And then the Russians and Austrians down here on the low ground, they started firing cannons and attacking them from the heights. And they started running away onto the ice. And that's what you saw with the cannon. So the ice, yeah, it happened. Was it planned as well as in the movie? No, the Russians were just fleeing in any direction. So it just happened to be that they went on a frozen lake and they they fired cannonballs into this lake and killed maybe couple they said anywhere from 2 to 200 Russians on that lake.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it did happen though.
That's wild. I like it just sounded like what I imagine when I'm reading Clausewitz stuff. Like, you
Yeah,
want that immediate the beginning initiation of a battle is what matters, and then like whatever your line is, that's the kind of line you're in for infantry fighting. And so him like letting himself get scouted incorrectly, like that was cool.
yep.
That was really cool to see.
Yeah, that is a cool scene. I like that. And they're like, "Oh, we've been discovered." And he's like, "Good." Like it.
Yeah.
I wish they would have shown more of that strategic level, like almost like I wish they would have shown it like a Rain Man. You guys were mentioning the autism before. Like if it would have been like even like the Hangover, where they're like working the numbers in his head,
Yeah.
and it showed like him figured out because that's all he did when he went to a battle. He would figure out the probability, figure out how many he had and how many the enemy had, do the probability in his head, and then he would make his decision based on that. And he was just better at that than anyone else in the world at that time.
It seems to me that from the very beginning of the movie, right? So it seems like they're really harping on cannons. So they show
Yeah.
they
Sure.
show smelt in the beginning where they're like smelting some new cannons,
Yep.
mortars and all that. And
Yep.
the whole first where they tried to take over that port city. He's like, it's not a city, it's a port.
Right.
Um, it seems like the thesis statement of like the movie was that Napoleon is good with placing cannons at the right spot at the right time. Like
And
that
he
was
was. He was
okay.
great. Yeah, he was trained as an artillery officer.
Okay.
He knew that if you could put like a battery of cannons in one spot, you could blow a hole in the enemy line and then send your cavalry and infantry through that hole. So yeah, he was adept. I'd say probably the best artilleryman in history at setting up his cannons in the right spots.
That's kind of crazy because like
That is.
French are kind of known for that too, right? I was talking with you about it. Like Joan of Arc was known for knowing how to place artillery in battles too. Like that's the same. That's just weird. Like the only two like French historical like leaders I know are Joan of Arc and Napoleon.
It's a
Both-
French
Yeah.
thing, huh?
Yeah.
Who knew?
Well, and Charles de Gaulle, he was a tank officer. He was pretty good at punching holes in German lines. So yeah, looking back on history, there's been a lot of impressive French military leaders. Louis XIV, well, he was more of a king, but there's a lot out there. Charles Martel, but yeah, I would say Napoleon was probably the best out of all of them.
Interesting.
Did you do what I do all the time where you have a movie that you're really looking forward to and you like build up this expectation super hardcore and then you watched it and you're like, man, it didn't meet your expectations?
Yeah, a little. I was trying to kill one with a low bar for that
Yeah.
reason. I was like, all right, this is just it's gonna suck. I'm gonna hate this movie.
You've been burned before.
Yeah, but the coronation scene, that was my favorite where he got crowned. Like that was like a piece of artwork in a museum coming alive. I love that scene.
Cool.
That was a good scene.
Yeah.
He
No,
did.
it was
He took the crown and like held it, and he like put it on himself and like said,
And everyone
"I found-"
gasped.
Yeah,
Right? That was like that goes in with the whole he's not very
he's uncouth, right?
and he doesn't understand like social cues and like tradition in that way.
It's me with my
yeah.
in-laws.
But I think he also wanted to send the message to the Pope, who's going to put the crown on his head, that no man is. I did this on my own. No one else did. That's
a
why
good
he.
point.
I like
Yeah.
it.
It's a good point.
But yeah, no, I agree with you. Like, Mike, I saw it with my teenage kids and they loved it. So I think when you go into movies, you just kind of have to have an open mind on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is about like the pike and shot scene in Waterloo. Well, I guess we'll back up to the Waterloo thing. So I didn't know how close of a call do you really think Waterloo was? Like,
It's a good
did
question.
Napoleon have a chance to win it? If
He did.
Okay, so
Yep.
if weather was good,
really?
his timing was accurate. He could have gotten each one at a time.
Absolutely. I like that they showed the rain, coming down, but I think just the Prussians coming in earlier than he thought, the English fighting harder, even though there were no trenches at Waterloo. I don't know why they put that in there.
Okay.
But I think, yeah, he was very close. I would say, gosh, maybe I'd say 6 or 7 out of 10 times he would win that battle. But just
Oh.
factors worked against him. Like,
And
like I
you
said,
got Berthier.
No, right, exactly. He did not have his right hand man, Marshal Berthier, with him. He didn't have some of his best marshals. They were either dead or they were had fled the country or just didn't want to be involved again. And they're up against one of the best generals of all time, the Duke of Wellington. And I wish they would have featured him more in the movie. He was barely in it.
I know.
Yeah.
I was talking about my sister-in-law, and she's like, "Yeah, the Duke of Wellington was there." I was like, "Who? Oh, the guy who was frowning in the movie? Like,
Right.
oh, the Duke of Wellington? I should have known. Like, that's an important character."
Yeah.
Yeah. He was kind of stodgy. I was like, I wish they would have shown him like running around like Napoleon, which he did. He was a great leader of men, and he would inspire his men riding on his horse back and forth to his regiments. I wish they would have done more of that, and with Napoleon too. Like Napoleon, people love Napoleon. His troops like adored him. And there's a great quote. I forget what. Oh, I think it was Aldous Huxley. He said, "To his dog, every man is Napoleon," and thus the constant popularity of dogs, because his troops like they just worshipped the guy and wanted to make him happy, and they did. They conquered most of Europe for that man, and I think they should have featured more of that devotion in the movie.
The scene that really captures what you're talking about is that scene where all of those,
He's marching on Paris.
yeah, when all the
Yeah.
men like are about to shoot him,
So
and he
after
comes out
Yeah.
and he's like, "I miss you guys. I just
Yeah.
want to like be with you guys." And then they're like, "Long live the emperor!"
Yeah, and that part was true. That was incredible. Yeah,
Yeah, that part to me made me like we looked at each other and we're like, "Holy shit!
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy."
yeah.
Big if true.
Yeah.
But it
No,
definitely showed like
totally true.
people under him were like, "No, no, no, I like this dude as a leader. Like he is a good leader." So
Yep.
it was
Yep.
cool to see that scene.
Yeah, even though he cost millions of lives and many soldiers died, I think they realized they were in the moment of greatness. Like no one had ever done this. No one had ever done what Napoleon did. And I think his troops realized that. And when he came back from Elba and he's like taking off his coat and say, who wants to shoot their emperor? Nobody did. I think, like you said, that really spoke to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of horses, also, sorry, we're going back to Waterloo for a second. When they were showing that dude jump from horse to horse, when like,
Yep.
Yeah, that was
bro, that was the crate. I was like, what?
I've seen a lot of movies have the two horses, but I never seen like the utilization of it, like
Right.
what it's for. And they're like, no, it's so you can switch and like go faster for longer. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm an idiot.
Smart. I like
I
thought of that.
That was clever. Yeah, I like that. I didn't like them shooting a hole in Napoleon's hat. I thought that was stupid.
But cheesy.
Yeah, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
That never happened, but all right, let's put because it shows him kind of being like a weakling. He's running away, he's got a hole in his hat.
Yeah.
And speaking of Waterloo, so what do you think of the pike and shot scene? So for listeners who don't remember it or that don't know, I only know pike and shot from the game Civilization 6, but like I got obsessed with it because I'm like, oh man, pike and shots are dope. Like I'm beating all these horses. And the idea is that you form your troops into like a square, and then you have some other guys in the middle for in case the cavalry break through. And from what I was reading when I was playing a lot of Civilization was like, there's so many variations of it with like, sometimes they have axes, sometimes they have muskets. And in the movie, like they did it, like they showed troops wheeling into squares and then they showed cavalry try to charge them. And I was wondering if your take on that, like Waterloo is obviously a super famous battle. Like, did that shit happen? Like, did they do pike and shot shit there?
Yeah, I mean they did. There was forming of squares. There was cavalry charges, and the French could not break any of the British squares. So that part was accurate. I wish they would have shown it differently.
Okay.
But I mean that was a long battle. It was. I know in the movie it's over quick, but it was like a 10 to 15 hour slog of a battle if you count the retreat. So yeah, I mean those shots were cool. But again, there was more strategy to it than they showed in the movie, and yeah, if they could have made it like the Crown, how you have like 7 seasons of the Crown and it shows like different parts. Like I think that would have been a better way to approach it. But again, I don't know if they had the budget for that.
Right when the Waterloo scene happened, all I could think of in my mind was that scene in Jaws when that guy tells his like famous speech about when the USS Indianapolis sinks, and he's like, we were like all the squares at the Battle of Waterloo. And I never knew what that meant. And then I was like, oh, squares.
Squares. Now you know. Now you know.
Dude.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too. I like that scene because we had just Spencer just did a series on the Battle of New Orleans, and we were talking about like the British were supposed to be like, this well-trained oiled machine. Like they were intense and like they knew how to wheel, they knew how to drill, like they knew how to move infantry lines. And then the Battle of New Orleans is so iconic because it was 30 minutes and there was just nowhere for them to do any of these things. And so to see this like relatively the same exact time period and to see what the British can do, like it was a cool for me, like, I was just told about their potential and they didn't get to do it. And then I see here, like them actually doing it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and probably some of the same troops. I mean, those two battles are relatively close to each other. Yeah.
That would have sucked, man. You survived the Battle of New Orleans. Like, Harry, that was Harry, guys. Like, okay, we got to go stop Napoleon.
Right. Yeah. No, I listened to your Battle of New Orleans. That was good episodes.
Dude, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
But how did you guys think Joaquin did?
I love Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for Joaquin Phoenix movies.
Me too.
I'll watch anything that dude's in.
He did play it almost the exact same, except for just like less incest based.
I'm trying to think of a scene where I was like, holy shit, this dude's acting is incredible. I suppose, man, the scene where he confronts Josephine after being cheated on, and he's like, how could you possibly disrespect me so much? Like, I did feel his genuine pain in that scene.
Yeah.
I also liked when they were charging the fort at the beginning, when he's like taking those deep breaths before he charged on the horse, because he's like, this is my moment, like it's do or die, like this is how generals are made in this time period. Like this is how great men are made in these military time periods. You have to like, pick your probability and then go for it, and it may not work out, but like you do it and then it works out, then you're great, then you're George Washington, man.
Yeah.
That's a good point. At the very beginning, when he's about to charge the ports, he's like, I was like, holy shit, this dude is nervous.
Yeah.
Like I felt the nerves.
That was a good call, because he was kind of breathing deeply and he was like kind of anxious before he charged in. His horse got like destroyed by a cannonball. So
messed up.
Wild.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how good Napoleon was on a horse, but then like learning about how, like where he came from, was that accurate though? Like, was he that good on a horse?
Yeah, there's debate about that, if he really was that good, because as we all know, he was somewhat short.
5'6".
So people are like, he wasn't really good on a horse. He couldn't really wrap the legs around and he was kind of like somewhat pot-bellied, so he couldn't really like control a horse like some of his bigger generals. But that scene, he was actually wounded in the leg with a bayonet from a British sergeant. So they could have done more of that Toulon battle than they did. No, I thought Joaquin did good. I thought Vanessa Kirby was great as Josephine. I didn't like that there was no secondary characters that I could really get into, like the Marshals or Talleyrand or Caulaincourt. Like there was no, even like I said, the Duke of Wellington, there was no evil guy or villain for me to hate. There was no brilliant general of Napoleon's for me. There was no.
Yeah. Like for you, and I said this after we watched it, where he was like, I wonder what, John's going to think of this. And I was like, I feel like his podcast is about all the accompanying characters that are with Napoleon. Like you talk a lot about the talent that is surrounded by Napoleon. It's not just Napoleon, it's about all these other human beings that were also very smart and very talented. Yeah. And I do kind of agree with you that the movie did not really dive into like being like, oh man, that general was super cool, or it was just very like, it's about Napoleon, right? So I did definitely.
Well, you're right. They kind of switched between, because originally it's kind of like the Tsar Alexander is the enemy. He's the antagonist a little bit, and he's like kind of naive. And then it suddenly becomes the Duke of Wellington, and there's not like a clear and Alexander's big triumph in Moscow, he's not even there in the scene, and they don't do like a cut shot to him, like celebrating his that he actually was smart and competent. So like that felt unresolved. Like, oh, there's no development for him. Like, okay, and then we're just now Duke of Wellington frowning.
Yeah, like give me what's a movie? Aliens. So give me like a Hudson. Give me like a nervous guy who doesn't know where he should be, or a guy like Hicks or Vasquez or someone else besides Ripley that I can kind of identify with. Maybe.
Who's the cavalry guy? The guy who was leading the cavalry in Waterloo. What was that guy's name? You like the big.
Oh, that was Marshal Ney. Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Yeah.
So I feel like he had like a cool moment at the end, but it was unsatisfactory because I had no buy-in for him earlier.
Correct.
And so I feel like if you were going to make him have that scene where he's like, is Napoleon fucking up? Like, are we about to lose this?
Right.
I would have liked to see him like have to rely on Napoleon earlier, as I'm sure he had to, and then that work out each time. And then now he's like, "Oh no, this is the moment!" Like
That's a
Yeah.
perfect point. Yeah, that's
Yep, you nailed it. Yeah, and Marshall Ney brought him a lot of victories, and I wish they would have had more of that. Like you said, that was a really good point.
So, have you by any chance, my algorithm on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it these days, do you follow by any chance Dr. Robbie McNiven? Have you
I know that name. Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
don't know him personally,
Oh,
but yeah.
so this dude, me neither. But this dude posted, I don't know, I'll post the thread and I'll send it to you guys, but he goes through and just lists all the inaccuracies of the movie. Like
Oh yeah,
this
yeah,
scene, this scene, this scene. And it turns out, I guess, from people who have, doctorates in history are like, yeah, that movie was not accurate at all.
yeah.
But I don't know. I get it's like it's hard. Like you have to sit there and think, would if it was historically accurate, would it invite as many people to the movie theater to be like, "Oh, I really want to see like all these like would it be as entertaining?" You know what I mean? Like why did they think that they needed to completely rewrite history in order for people to be able to sit in a movie theater and
Yeah,
enjoy it? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. No, I hear you on that. Like I said in my review, I cannot make a better Napoleon movie than Ridley Scott can.
Yeah.
I, I take issue with it that he took a lot of liberties with history and the linear uh, lining up of some of that stuff, like the part where he's on Elba and he learns that Josephine's cheating on him with potentially the Tsar Alexander, and he rushes back. Well, no, when he was on exile in Elba, Josephine had already died; she was dead before he came.
Oh,
Yeah, so that part was kind of strange to me. So there's a little stuff like that, but just the last 30 minutes of movie, I just didn't like the rush. Like he didn't abdicate after the disaster in Russia either. Like he fought on for another, gosh, 16 months, almost.
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's different. That's way different.
That is different.
Yeah.
right. So there's some major parts that they just kind of trimmed.
Yeah.
Again, I cannot make a movie on Napoleon like Ridley Scott. The guy is Sir Ridley Scott. So yeah, there's many, 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 many historical accuracies in it. But I think, like you guys said, if you're totally unfamiliar with Napoleon and you like the movie, then it did its job.
Yeah. I just think about like, we've all are either currently or have taught middle school and high school. And if I can just get anybody interested in anything, like,
Correct.
then like, that's great for me. Like, I don't care
Absolutely.
about I have no more morals on anything in terms of like source matters and like the content. Like, just get kids interested in shit.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, and maybe it will. Like maybe it'll spark some kids' interest to really become a doctorate in Napoleon or study Napoleon and learn something new. I think you guys are onto something, but I think also, when you teach history, you teach everything, and you try not to rely on dates too much, but you want to make sure you're presenting accurate information of what happened. Yeah. So yeah, you got to keep some truth to it, but you do have to pique some interest as well.
Well, the good news is that for anybody who wants to know the accurate story, they just head on over to Generals and Napoleon, dude, and listen to all 63 episodes?
63. Yeah. And
that's my new cleaning my house music, like what I'm listening to and what
yeah,
like
it's the
you guys
Hoppin' show.
You're too kind. No, I love Battle Buddies. I was listening to the Mogadishu episode just before we came on, and really, really interesting stuff.
Big old downer. That episode is
that one's kind of sad.
Yeah, but Ridley Scott directed Black Hawk Down.
Very true. Synchronicity.
Wait. Okay, so in one of Napoleon's philosophical things that you pointed out a few times in your show is that he wanted lucky people because he felt that the hardest working people were more lucky than other people.
Correct.
After studying Napoleon, like you have been for so many years and like really into it last couple of years, do you believe in that now? Like, are you the harder working people are luckier than everyone else?
It's funny. I listen, since we're talking podcasts, I listened to Guy Raz has a podcast about, he interviews like CEOs who started like Chipotle or Spanx or some famous thing. And he always asks them his last question, did Chipotle succeed because you're lucky or because you worked hard? And it's a valid question. And they always say, well, I worked hard. So I guess just the luck came because of that, and you guys are teachers, you know how hard it is to you work really hard, and I thank you for your service as teachers. But
We're not teaching history in Florida. Like it's a whole other thing.
whole other thing. Right. But no, I do believe in that. I think the harder you work, the luckier you are, and Napoleon's a good example of that.
I like it. It's a fun thing to like have rattle in my head. Like the hardest working people are the luckiest.
Yeah, there's something to it. It's a both situation for sure.
Yeah. But no, I love your show, and I really appreciate you guys having me on. I could talk about this movie all day long.
I got one more question. I think I had the perfect ending question since we reached an hour, and it's it's Florida time. So
Bring it.
all right. Where's a good battle for us to start with? If we want to cover a good Napoleon battle, where is a good place to start with? And maybe not necessarily Waterloo, since that's the obvious choice, but like
It's actually my least favorite battle because
it's a good one.
Give us a good one.
It's so overdone. It's so overstudied. There's like 1,000 books on it, and I think it's too analyzed. Actually, I think it. I mean, yes, it was the end of the Napoleonic era of Napoleon's reign, so it gets all the credit. But if I were going to study one battle, it would be the one with the cannonballs in the ice. I would say Austerlitz. That's his strategic baby. And there's so much to that battle beforehand. The Russian general Kutuzov said, "This is a trap, guys." He told the Tsar, he told the King of Austria, and they ignored him. They also sent in a Russian general to Napoleon's camp, and Napoleon acted like really timid around him. It was like kind of like pretending to be afraid of him, so they would attack him. Like there was just so much strategy before the battle started, during the battle, and after the battle. And the Tsar was actually found crying next to a river by himself after the battle because Napoleon so dominated his army in that battle. So I would say that would be the one to really brush up on. That's my favorite one.
That's good insight. And then follow-up question, are you down to come back on when we do cover a Napoleon battle and have a little free just talk and chat about it after we cover it?
100%. Please have me on. I love this. You guys are great. Yeah.
Dude, you're great. Again, we appreciate you so much for being here, man. It really does genuinely mean the world to us. And, it's good to have this little community of independent, history podcasters.
Podcast community is a thing.
It is a thing. And
Can I tweet that I was on your fabulous show? I'd love to tell my audience.
Please do. Please do. Yeah, and we'll do the same.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, we have a little tradition here at Battle Buddies where when we sign off, everybody who wants to, we say bonsai together. So if you want to join us in that, basically all I say is, listeners, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And until next time, bonsai.
That was good.